Many thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Business Week here on Arise News. I'm joined now by Ifeoma Abidoye, who is fintech practitioner, Hazel and Horeb Advisory, to review some of our top stories in more detail. Ifeoma, good morning. Always a pleasure to have you on Business Week. How are you today?
Good morning, Abby. Thanks for having me.
Most welcome. Well, we have a few things to get through. Let's begin with Nigerian businesses struggling to service loans as interest rates hit 36%. Let's get into it. What, in terms of sustainable business growth, what are the ripple effects of this?
Okay, so definitely 36% is quite high. But let's step back a bit and just zoom into why we have interest rates that high. Part of the tools that the central bank is trying to use to monitor inflation is the MPR, that's the monetary policy rate. Right now, the MPR is about 27.5% with an asymmetric corridor of plus 500 bips, minus 100 bips. And what this means is that interest rates that banks will be able to offer to their clients will have to be on the high side, because if that's what the central bank has set, then banks have little room to wiggle around that. Central bank has also made the CRR, that's the cash reserve ratio, retain that at 50%. Liquidity ratio at 30%. Now, what all this translates to is that the interest rates that clients are going to get, as individuals and corporates are going to get from commercial banks, are going to be on the high side. And central bank believes that this will help to bring the rate of inflation down. Now, there are many school of thoughts about whether this is the right move, but that's where we are, and that's why we're at that point. Now, is this sustainable? I think that businesses are going to struggle. Now, most businesses that will be getting the higher regions of the 30s will be medium MSMEs, because banks will consider their risk higher than, say, a high-end corporate. So what happens when a business is paying about close to 40%, 40% of its cost is to pay back loans. So what do they have left for? Electricity bills, other logistics, wages, cost of business, running the business, the cost of raw materials itself. You have little available for that. And businesses are going to struggle, quite unfortunately. And that will also have a ripple effect on the economy. If we're talking about MSMEs suffering, they contribute about 46% to Nigeria's GDP. So it means that we have 46% already shaky because, interest rates are high. And then they contribute about 84%, to the workforce. So that means we have a lot of things at stake. And I'm really hoping that things improve, because businesses will struggle with that rate.
Certainly that ripple effect is quite undoubtedly going to be there, and businesses have to bear the brunt of that. Let's look next as African financiers pledging $100 billion for green growth. What mechanisms are needed to ensure that this pledge translates into real impactful projects to begin with?
Oh, thanks, Abby. So before we even talk about that, I think this is really progress in the right step. And why do I say this? This is now Africa funding its own sustainability needs, as opposed to getting funds outside Africa. I think that it's time we're now taking ownership, of our sustainability goals and our desires. So I think that that's something very commendable and remarkable on that front, having African entities like Afrexim, AFDB coming into the picture saying that we're going to pledge to fund this. However, I think that we need to go beyond just headlines to actual practical steps. And how would that happen? I think there are many ways that that can happen, but I think two things are very important, amidst the many things that have to be done. And one of it is to actually outline specific goals. So what do I mean? Yes, we want to be sustainable, we want to grow and have sustainability at the core of what we're doing as in terms of our industrialization processes. But what do we want to achieve? So if we want to ensure that our greenhouse emissions are at a certain rate, we have to set it. And bearing in mind that Africa is still at the earlier stages of its industrialization compared to, say, the West, for example. So when we set realistic goals, that's one step. And in addition to that, accountability is key. Just on as you have on the micro level, where you have companies reporting on their sustainability, you have them saying, this is what, for example, M&S had something that I really liked. I think they called it the Plan A because there's no Plan B. And this is what we're going to achieve. Everyone knows that this is what is going to be achieved, and then you are reporting it. You are accountable, saying, oh, I'm going to reduce emissions by 10%, for instance, and this is how I'm going to do it. Accountability. And then also having milestone trackers saying by year 2, 10% emissions are reduced. By year 3, 15%. When you don't measure things, you don't manage it. So I think accountability, measuring, and managing is very important.
Yeah, certainly. So certainly a right step in the right direction, rather. But you want that crystal clear vision, the roadmap,
exactly.
And also the accountability. We can't forget about that because we hear about pledges.
Exactly, and that's something that sometimes happen. We make pledges, everyone's happy, excited. But when it comes to doing the real work, who is measuring the actual impact of what we're saying that we want to achieve? If you're not measuring it, it can't
until
be managed.
it's executed, it's only a pledge.
Exactly.
All right, let's look next at Ghana's ICT sector. In what ways has Ghana managed to outperform traditional industries in driving GDP growth? And can this momentum last, more importantly?
Okay, well, that's a feel-good news coming from Ghana. Yeah. GDP growth by any means is actually very good news. So their GDP increased by about 6.3% year on year, and that's been the fastest since 2019 actually. And this time around, the hero wasn't cocoa or oil, it was ICT. ICT contributed about 21.3%, and that's remarkable, because it shows that technology, again, is becoming to be at the forefront of growth in Africa, which is very good because it's following the trend that we see globally. Now, what is the reason for that? Because if we're going to talk about sustaining momentum, we need to know why this has happened. And according to data, most of this has happened because there's been rising data use. So the ICT sector has seen people subscribing more to mobile data. Then in addition to that, there's also been more mobile money adoption. So that has increased, and that meant that a lot of revenue comes there. But we shouldn't forget, one very key thing is that there's been a lot of investment in that sector as well. So much so that Oxford Business Group actually cited that by 2030, that industry will have grown to about $5 billion from $1 billion that it was about 3 years ago. So that's quite remarkable. And talking about sustainability, one thing that Ghana has been able to do is maintain a stable macro environment. Inflation in Ghana, funny enough, was in about March this year, it was about 22% thereabout, but now it has gone down to about 11%, and that has helped investors' confidence to improve, and it's a more comfortable environment to invest. Investors are comfortable when they know that there's some sort of stability. So inflation is going down. There's been a trend of disinflation for a while now. They're confident that their returns are secured, and it won't be lost through changes to inflation. Another thing is that Ghana is also taking time to have policies that are friendly to the ICT sector. They have something called the ICT 4AD, that's ICT for Accelerated Development. So they are particularly checking and ensuring that anything that the ICT sector requires, they're getting to be able to improve, businesses, and that again will ensure that that sector grows. And I think that this is something, and to be fair, we're seeing a lot of improvement in Nigeria in that area, and I think this is something the whole of Africa can also adopt.
Absolutely, some very deliberate and strategic moves on the part of Ghana there, which is paying off quite well, especially from an investor appetite. We don't have a lot of time left, and we still have Alibaba to get to. So very briefly, please, why is Alibaba turning to a $3.2 billion convertible bond issuance?
Okay, well, if you're in tech, AI and cloud is something that's really important. AI because everything is being automated by AI. You don't want to be left out by your competitors. You want to be as good. And cloud with AI means that there's a lot of storage requirement, and so that's where you have cloud. So Alibaba is taking the giant leap. Alibaba is on the top 30 list of valuable tech companies. And so what that means is that, of course, they want to retain their market share, they want to grow, they want to be more visible in that space. And then you have them doing that because they want to ensure that they have capacity to grow as is required. So cloud is the right step. And then convertible bonds, it just makes it flexible and even more interesting for investors because they have the opportunity to convert to equity. Convertible bonds means initially it comes in as a debt instrument and then they have the flexibility to change to equity. So it just makes it more interesting and they can get as many investors as possible.
Right, so this doesn't pose any risk, say, to investors?
No, it doesn't.
If anything, it's more welcoming news.
It is, exactly.
All right, if you joined us midway, I've been chatting with Ifeoma Abidoye, with fintech practitioner, Hazelden Horrop Advisory. Ifeoma, insightful as always. Many thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again very soon.
Thank you. Very happy to be here every time. Thanks.